Welcome to the Probability Podcast. Discussions on emerging and converging technologies, problems that are being solved, and the probability of positive and negative outcomes that we might expect. Now, please welcome your hosts, Jason, the generator Spracklin, and Patrick, the discriminator Lozon.
Hey everyone, this week we're diving into the fascinating intersection of comic book superpowers and real-world technology. From X-ray vision simulated by VR and Wi-Fi to exoskeletons that boost strength and jet suits that make flight possible, we are starting to witness science fiction leap into reality. We'll explore how adaptive camouflage is bringing us closer to invisibility cloaks and how brain-computer interfaces are turning thought into action. Join us as we unpack how human augmentation is moving from the pages of comics to our everyday lives and what that means for the future of being superhuman. So, Patrick, are you ready to be the next great American hero?
I got the hair for it. I'm ready.
Believe it or not, you'll be walking on air, man.
Believe it or not. Yeah. So when we think about, all this stuff back in, you go back to the 60s and, PAL and Kabam and Batman and all that, right? I mean, technologies back then, that was like a dream, and what we're doing today is real. So things have gone, multiple steps into the future here over the course of 20 years, right? So, yeah, I mean, look at X-ray vision, right? This is the strangest thing, where they're able to use Wi-Fi, and they can image through, concrete walls and that, and actually, well, they're not going to. It's not hi-fi, okay? It's not high def. I mean, you're going to see shapes and such, right? You're going to be able to make out something, right? And that's incredible, because you can't see through that, but you can utilize a new form of radiation and actually pick up and process a signal out of that. So pretty impressive, right?
Yeah, it's like bringing like science fiction into reality in a sense. But when you think about it, science fiction was really inspired by what kind of was being investigated or looked at in science, right? That's I guess why it's called science fiction, right? You had these, you had these writers or animators or creative, sorts that were looking at these different elements that could make someone kind of superhuman in whatever way they could sort of imagine it, right? It was in a very sort of like fantastical, cartoonish, over the top kind of way. But I guess that's like the whole topic or theme this week is kind of, we were talking about how many of these things that were thought of as, being a quote unquote superhero are now like verging on are now on the verge of being possible, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you go and you can pick up a signal, and actually process, through a high rise, let's say, and you can be in a helicopter, and you can visualize all the different people walking through, for hundreds of feet through walls of cement, because you have this capability to individually process all these signals and relay that that through that channel to your imaging piece, which this is all about linking technology. So you got the VR goggles, right? And so you're receiving and processing, and you're displaying an image of that perceived, space, right? That space-time link, and with that, you're able to have that new dimension, which we can't see normally, right? We can't see in infrared. We can't see in any of these high resolution electromagnetic spectrum bands. So when you think about it, it is superhuman, in a way. This is through technical augmentation, right?
Yeah, it's sort of beyond the five senses, right? Like
Yeah,
being able to
it
see
is.
through things using, whether it's X-ray or infrared, and then bringing that into like a visual display, which has now become even more and more friendly, right? As far
Yeah,
as form factor and cost and everything else. I mean, back in the day, some of these things kind of existed, but you would have had to been sitting hooked up to a giant computer or something. And now you have mainstream companies like Apple creating, Vision Pro, and then you combine this sort of augmentation of reality with AI processing and overlays and everything else. We're certainly at a point where there's so much available. If you wanted to sort of concoct your own version of a superhero, there's lots of technologies out there to do it, right?
okay, yeah. And the thing is, you can do it on a budget, right? It's not going
Yeah.
to cost. You don't have to be a whole government to afford some of these technologies now. That's the amazing thing, right? Batman maybe in his bat cave with his billions of dollars was able to do it, right? But now average man can do it. Look out, it's average man. Yeah. So yeah. So then we get into sound. I always find like the study of sound vibration, sound waves. This an absolutely fascinating area, right? Of study, right? And they're able to actually cut things with ultrasonic sound, right? So with that in mind, you're looking at the energy you're putting out, and then the damage you're doing, right? And it's fascinating how you can do that in a very precise manner, right? And you can reduce heat, for instance, and reduce waste, right? Because you're cutting with very close precision, right? Um, they're also using this, of course, and we've all heard about, utilizing ultrasound, right? So that's the next step is being able to perform surgery using, focused ultrasound waves, right? Waves, and basically you understand what types of cells tend to absorb certain frequencies, right? And with that knowledge, you can then focus in on, cancer cells, for instance, right? And actually destroy, yet the other cells around it are okay, right? So it's fascinating what they're able to do with, we'll call it sonic technologies, right? Acoustic uh,
But in the area
devices.
of like superheroes, you had, basically they were using it as like a sort of like an attack, right? Like we
Yeah,
look at the X-ray vision version, right? That was sort of a power that Superman had, for example.
yeah,
And then we're trying to make this tie in from a comic book hero to real life. So
right, right.
in this example of sound, we're looking at like the sonic scream,
Yeah,
produced by like Black Canary, and it was one of their first
Banshee.
female superheroes, and Banshee, which I'm not totally familiar with, but sonics have even been used by the military in wartime, right? This idea that loud, abrasive music, for example, could be sort of could put a stress on an enemy. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, I can't remember the exact incident, but they were using like heavy metal music. Like I think Guns N' Roses might have been one of them. And if anybody's ever heard Axl Rose scream, you could understand that
Ah,
if you weren't an American
Buffalo.
teenager, you'd probably hear that at 1,000 decibels
Yeah,
and think the devil was coming to get you. But certainly it's been, sonics can be used in many ways, but certainly as a sort of weapon, as it were. I guess is how it
yeah.
was used in the
Well, there's lots
comics.
of rumors around there that were using for sound and ultrasound against, large groups of people like mobs and that, right?
Well,
It
crowd
causes
control and that type of
crowd
thing.
control, nausea, and disorientation, and yeah. There's the thing is, there's been reports of this, right, across the globe about these types of devices being used, right? And you know, we're our whole body is vibrating. We're we're in sync with our environment in a lot of ways, right? And certain certain harmony or certain frequencies that do not agree with us, right? And to utilize those, those frequencies to disrupt normal processes of the biology, whether that makes, make you go number 2 or whatever. It's just not good,
Actually, it's funny, you mentioned that, because I believe there's a concept in the music. Just having a look at it here now. Yeah, the brown note, it's called, is a humorous, although fictional, sound frequency believed to be so low that it would cause involuntary bowel movements. So there you go, Patrick. This is how far we've sunk in this season of the Probability Podcast. We're talking about the brown note now.
Yeah, that's great. The brown note. Yeah, yeah. Not only does it cut through metal, yeah, it can embarrass you to the end.
Well, it's funny because all kidding aside, though, I've been to more than my fair share of concerts, and certainly, when you get hit with a force of, some of these concerts get up to over 100 decibels.
Right.
And when you have a kick drum, hitting you, it's sort of, from a sonic perspective, you feel it hitting you in the chest. I've actually been at shows where they've had to do a quick test on the drum kit. And they really crank it up, and the guy's hitting the kick pedal and hitting the drums, and it's percussive, right? You feel it in your chest and your whole body in an instance, right? And even a huge amount of bass or a beat, you sort of feel it almost passing, through your body, for example, right? Or I've gone to see the heavy metal band Metallica a couple times, and they've got the song One, which is about this guy in wartime who gets injured and loses his arms and legs and this and that, and it's a pretty dark song, but they started out with the sounds of helicopters and gunfire in the distance, and then all of a sudden the landmines start going off, and in the concert they set off real explosives. And I remember the first time I saw them in an arena, I was excited, so I wanted to get up right up front, and I was pressing myself right up against the gate, 5 feet from the stage. And when these landmine percussive, obviously simulate, but when those went off, the security guy standing in front of me, I'm not even kidding, he jumped about 3 feet in the air. It basically, I could feel this hitting myself in the chest to where it was almost propelling my body backwards. It was so loud and percussive. Yeah. So when you think about it, it's, these weren't things that were actually hitting me. These were just some different elements of sound waves that my body was having a severe physical sort of reaction to. So you could see how, something like the brown note might cause a few problems, right?
Well, you won't hear the brown note because you got your hearing aids. You turn it down, right?
You won't hear it. You'll just start running for the bathroom.
Too late. Yeah. Okay, so let's go into super strength. Now, I always think of super strength as, what's your name?
Steroids,
right? Come at me, bitch, right? She gets in there in the suit, the cargo.
Yeah, Sigourney Weaver.
And it's that was cool. That was a cool scene, right? And bottom line, that was the example of what we call industrial exoskeleton right there, right? And that's not that far off. That's doable now, to build. I think what they're trying to do in a lot of ways is try to enhance in a lightweight, yet in a to provide a higher level of precision and strength and speed, right, and mobility. So, that's not all about that industrial, Sigourney Weaver, pick up this 10-ton weight kind of thing. It's there a lot of the military applications where they're utilizing these exoskeletons. It's about being agile too, right? So,
that was essentially Tony Stark, right, from Iron Man. The whole thing was he was sort of this, billionaire that was able to utilize all this tech and create, this suit, which could do many things, which we'll probably get into other aspects, but certainly, that super strength part was a big part of it, right? And then
Yeah.
you've got this interesting enough, now that we're talking about like bridging the gap between like comic book and real life, you've got this real guy named James Hobson, which I think I mentioned in one of our earlier episodes when we were talking about sort of human augmentation a little bit in one of the season 2. I think we were talking about it. But he's known as the hacksmith, so he's actually built a real life Iron Man suit essentially using existing technology. And really, I don't, this guy's like a millionaire, right? But he certainly has been able to like prove that with enough time and effort or whatever, you could create a real life suit. So if you look up this guy Hobson, you'll see the whole story about how he created his own Iron Man suit, for example.
Well, all this work that they're doing on building robots, right, and these artificial muscles and everything like that, that's all going to be part of the integrated back into these other technologies, like these augmentation technologies, right? So we're going to see, I truly believe we're going to be able to see a version of an exoskeleton, very much like Iron Man, where it's going to have, capabilities of not only enhancing, your strength, but also your speed. And you never know, maybe incorporate flight, right? Not so far off, I don't think, right? It's all about balancing off the capabilities of power and, moving that, being able to, how those propellant systems and that kind of thing work together. Because you can build these today and then it runs for 5 minutes, it runs out of power, kind of thing. It is about all these technologies that we're doing today, like with batteries and power generation, that tomorrow we're going to be able to build, better representations of what we have. In science fiction, right?
Yeah, if you look at the when we were talking about human augmentation, you've got now this sort of exploration into connecting the mind directly to computers and to electronics, and you see the application sort of is that at a basic sort of level, where people trying to regain function or mobility, they're able to sort of use their brain to speak to this sort of electronic arm they have, for example, right? And that they can communicate to, so they're translating the brainwaves into using the arm. But if you extrapolate that out to, the idea of exoskeletons, right? And being able to not just have it respond to your movement, but to be able to have some control over the externality of it with your brain, which again sounds like we're talking about science fiction, but we're really at that point where
we are.
They're starting to have success in that sort of brain computer interface. You can see that we're going to be entering some really interesting times, especially when it comes to potential uses in military or police enforcement or what have you, right? Like a lot of this is positioned as being used for like medical purposes or helping people regain function or what have you, but the risk to it being utilized for evil is quite high, right?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, right, we've talked about this, the military application of robotics, right? So how is a normal soldier going to face one-to-one, these enhanced machines, right? The idea is you enhance the soldier, right? You augment the soldier. So if you look at, every military out there is throwing millions into this right now, right? This is a serious area of R&D. And they're going to continue to do that because bottom line is there is, no matter what anybody says today, there's a raw material shortage issue. You can't just build millions upon billions of these robots and then flush them out onto the field, right? There's a limited supply, right? But they can be very dangerous to a normal person. But an augmented soldier who has lesser capacity from a point of view of manufacturing, and lesser cost and lesser investment, or point of view of that technology, can wear that augmentation suit and be on par or even better than, the robot, right? So in that case, then who wins, right? I remember this story I read in Reader's Digest. It was about, this is ages ago. And it was about the Coast Guard. They're going out. There's a ship listing, power's out, the engine's down. The crews, there's like 20 crew members, North Sea, we've got high waves. It's incredibly dangerous and it's dire, right? And the captain of the Coast Guard, they sent in these special cutter boats, and basically there's too rough for these boats, and basically he said everybody's, he got everybody out of war, and they went back into the old days and they rowed in, and instead of depending on the on the motors, right? And they were able to get in there and rescue the crew and get them back out. And the story, the underlying, pinning of the story was about the heart, right? It was about the will of man, right? To beat the obstacles, no matter how hard they are, where machines might fail and still succeed, right? And I think that's one point you cannot ever, no matter what, you compare artificial technologies to mankind, there are some defining lines, I think, right? And that's one of them. That is why you would even pursue this type of technology versus just go out and build an army, right?
Yeah, because with now the way robotics are going, in terms of AI and autonomy and all that, sort of fantastical breakthrough we've had in terms of what we're able to do now with robotics, I think we're still going to see this idea of augmenting humans, right? For whatever purpose, if we're thinking about it in terms of, wartime, or if we're rescue or what have you, right?
Dangerous situations, any kind.
Yeah, what you were talking about reminded me of that in an episode last season. I played a bit of the speech from The Matrix. I forget the context really, but you had Agent Smith is fighting Neo, and basically Neo just keeps on coming, right? And he's getting beaten down, and Agent Smith keeps asking him, like, why? Like, you're beaten here. You can't win. Like, why do you persist? Why do you persist? And Neo looks up at him and he goes, because I can. Like, this idea that, and I don't know if you can really program that, right? Like, there's really like a will in humans to overcome obstacles or to push through or to really do incredible things. So as much as we think we're going to create these like super, android armies, I'm not quite sure we're going to get there, right? I think there's something infinitely special about the human spirit that can't quite be replicated, right?
Yeah, and even, I was kind of talking about military, but, take that anywhere, like you said, right? Go, you want to mining or doing any type of dangerous rescue or, imagine, I don't know, railway disaster and first responders being outfitted with exoskeletons that are capable of moving tons of waste out of the way to rescue people, right? This is very applicable, right? It has uses and it can save lives, this type of technology. So it's worth the investment of time and effort, and ultimately I think we're going to get there because we have all these intersecting technologies happening. So you have the ability to power it as one. You have the flexibility of materials and the knowledge of how to build these types of machines, in joints and mechanisms, and you also have the raw materials themselves in order to create these things that are capable of handling all the different stresses. All that stuff is all kind of converging, right? And yeah, I think Iron Man is going to be a real thing one day, right?
Well, at our age, we're probably going to need it in another
Yeah.
10 years just to go
I
out and
could
get
use
groceries,
Go to Costco, yeah. Oh my goodness.
Go to Costco and
Push
just
the cart, man.
carry a pallet of like blueberries home on your back.
Pallet.
But,
Yeah, you buy everything in pallets. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, that's strength. Let's move on from strength.
how about like invisibility? That's always that's sort of a fun one, right? That you can,
Yeah.
you always, when you ask people when they were a kid, like what kind of superpower, if they could have a superpower, what would it be, right? For whatever reason, a lot of us thought about invisibility. It's an interesting.
To what, right? To what?
Well, I mean,
that's a challenge. Like how many people
sneaking into the women's locker room. That's why.
That's right.
What do you think we want invisibility powers?
That's right. So the whole power of invisibility is sneaking around. And in the end, do you have to be naked too? Yeah, do you have to be naked too? That's that's the whole thing, right?
Yeah, wasn't there that Invisible Man movie? I don't know if that was. I'm assuming that was probably based on a comic book, right?
Yeah.
He was invisible, and if he had like a hat and glasses, you could see the hat and glasses. I think,
absolutely. Right? Yeah, you had to be running around. And so if it's cold, you have a problem. Certain parts could
you
be
need
frozen.
A whole different superpower to get that problem solved. But,
yeah. So it's there's limitations. But I mean, with this type of technology we're talking about here, they're actually building cloaks and not all the time are we talking about the visible rays or the visible frequencies of light. Are we invisible to radar, for instance, and LiDAR, right? That kind of thing. But with that in mind, being able to fool the eye, let's say, into thinking something. I mean, camouflage is where you go, right? Originally, that's the base technology, and so this is another form of camouflage, right?
Yeah, it's like bending light in a sense, right? So that you're not seeing the object, you're seeing what's around the object, I suppose, right? That's kind of the idea of, it's not quite invisibility in the truest sense, but I mean, everything we see every day is based off light reflecting off things into our eyes, and then that's all processed, back through the brain, right? I mean, that's the basic description of how we see every day. And if you've ever walked into a pitch black room, you can't see anything because there's no light reflecting off anything in the room. Sometimes all you need is a sliver of light to kind of get a sense of what's in the room. But if it's completely black, you got nothing to go on. I think that's sort of the idea here, right? That you can kind of fool the eye in a sense.
Well, I think the other side of it, if you think about it, like you send a $1,000 drone out in the air with a little machine gun on it, and it's got a little infrared camera on it, and you can see everybody and shoot at them, right? So the idea is, okay, can we give uniforms to our soldiers that in effect make that image not so visible, right? So it's like you have a $90 million jet taken down by a $10,000 rocket gun.
Yeah,
that's the thing, right? So you gotta fight technologies with equal cost technologies, so to speak, and it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be good enough, right? So, these devices, for instance, these drones that are flying around the air, they can't distinguish. There's always noise. There's always background noise, right? So that's where it's interesting where all this technology is going, because I do believe, the idea of being invisible, in one aspect is, being invisible to all these other devices out there, right? Being invisible to move through all that, through even cameras, being visible to cameras and things like that. Can you do that, right?
Mm.
Um, so that technology is tough, I think. It's difficult to accomplish. And you, as soon as you figure out methodologies of how to implement things like that, you build them into your, into your war war machines and such, right? But if you want to be able to just say take something like the cloak of invisibility, from Hogwarts, that's tough, right? That's really tough, right? Like a flexible blanket, right? And you know, being able to put that on and technically be invisible in the what's around you to the eye, right? Um, do I think they can get there? You know, it's like somewhat. It's like how far away are you to? It's like camouflage, right? So, yeah, I mean, you could be 30 feet from somebody, and you have this very effective camouflage on, and you're not moving, right? That's the first thing. That person can miss you, right? So, sure, but being able to completely go invisible. I mean, I guess you could sneak up behind somebody and pop them in the head or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
But what real good is it? Really, I don't know. Is it? Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's interesting though, really, because it's
Yeah.
again, it's one of those examples of something that there are technologies that are being used, to cloak, whether it's drones or airplanes or even people. Like you can see how combining that with like AI and other technologies, even when we get to quantum computing, right? I think we're going to see more advancements in that area. I think it's an area that hasn't been fully explored yet, but I mean, that's the ultimate, sort of advantage in any kind of warfare or conflict, right? Is to be able to be unseen, for
Yeah.
example, even if it's just trying to get somebody into a country or something like that. Not everything has to be rooted in the supernatural or in, science fiction type thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Some of the superheroes are, not necessarily super in the traditional way. I was talking about this, about this topic with my wife earlier, and she was like, "Well, yeah, then you have guys like the Punisher, who technically is sort of a comic book superhero who really has nothing but
Yes.
fortitude and raw grit from being in the army and the arsenal of weapons and able to take on 50 men at once." So that's sort of a different category, right? There's all kinds of different ways to look at what constitutes sort of a superpower, as it were, right?
That's right. You have super attitude.
Super
Super
attitude,
attitude.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And of
And then you
course,
got
you
like,
got super intelligence, right?
yeah, yeah.
Like I don't know
Well, you got
what
like
you.
Professor X and
Yeah.
these guys, right?
Yeah. But haven't you've been taking those pills, right?
No, you'd find some.
Oh yeah, you plug into the machine. Yeah, I mean, I think in the end, the ability to augment cognitively, that is, that's like the next frontier
Yeah.
to make ourselves smarter. Um,
Aren't we kind of
I
already there in a
don't know.
sense? Like, yeah, I know
No,
we've,
we're getting dumber. It's idiocracy. Have you seen Idiocracy?
yeah, I have for
That's where
sure.
we're going. I'm
That's
sorry.
where we're headed. Yeah.
We're headed
It's
there
interesting
by
because
speed.
it's interesting you say that because I was reading something the other day, and where I was going with that a minute ago was sort of saying, well, if you look at it, people are using AI in a sense to augment their intelligence, right? That they can use it to write things for them and research things and build up strategies or what have you, right? You can see like a million different examples of how people are using AI to augment themselves, or at least that's the sort of the way that AI has been marketed, right? And I mentioned in an early episode that AI has a marketing problem, which I think it does in some respect, but in other respects, it's done a pretty good job. But the thing I was reading was about AI being used in in education, for example,
Yeah.
And they were pretty much making the point that you were making, that really it's causing, people are using AI to get through school. And in some cases, they're using it to get in school, to be able to write essays, to get into universities and what have you. But they're not getting any smarter. So they're using it as a tool to kind of get through things. So like, um, in a macro sense, they say that the populace is actually getting dumber because of it.
Yeah.
We used to have things like Google at our fingertips where we could just look up things and Google things. And now we have AI, and not only can we ask it questions, now we can get it to do all these things for us. And in place of what we would normally, use critical thinking and, education and everything else for. And the article was talking about how both the students are using it for the work, and then the teachers are using it for the grading, which is something right out of a South Park episode. But you're slowly, or maybe not so slowly, maybe it's quickly, but we're quickly sliding into idiocracy, I think. Because
Yeah.
it's interesting that technology that has so much potential in the hands of humanity is actually making us dumber. Maybe not everybody. Maybe it's not making everybody dumber. I'm sure there's lots of people that are using it to their advantage. I mean, I use it, to sort of augment things I'm doing, but mostly for speed, because I already understand the topic I'm looking at, and I understand where I want to end up as far as what I want the output to be. And I'm feeding it, a certain level of information, and I'm taking that output and always sort of then rewriting it in the way that I would want to, read it, or something that represents the way I'm thinking about it. But I tell you, there's so many things I can do so much faster now,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
by utilizing AI as an augmentation tool. So I think it's AI across the board, I think, combined with like quantum computing, is really going to accelerate some of these technologies. And in the hands of people that really know how to utilize it, I think we're about to see some pretty interesting outcomes for sure.
Yeah. I think there's, if you think about what intelligence is the ability to store and recall, right? As much as it is the process, right? I mean, you have to have all these components in order for a system to work, right? So if you don't exercise those muscles per se, right, you're not really focusing on memorizing. You're not focusing on processing and regurgitating and then putting the two together, right? And this is where man is good at taking information in, and then over a course of time, learning about it, understanding it, making it fit together, right? That this is what we are able to do over time. But you have to do the work. You have to spend the time reading and digesting and understanding and building, getting all those foundational blocks down in order to make that, big leap in an idea. And this is where I think if you take shortcuts, right, you never truly understand. You never really truly absorb the basis of the information.
Yeah, you
So
just get the output, right? I mean,
you just get the output and you run with it. It's like, that's idiocracy, man. That's, push the button and there you go. Well, just make it go, right?
Yeah, and that's where we're kind of at with AI
Yeah.
now, right? That it's
Yeah.
like, and like I say, I see it in two different ways. Like, see how it can be used as a tool, as like a productivity tool, or what have you, right? Or to find information faster, and then the process it in a certain way. And like, it can be really used to almost give you a bit of a superhero kind of power, but it can also be used as a shortcut and essentially turn you into, a lazy slob when it comes to like actually putting in the work to create something great. It was like, there's a quote that I remember from Bill Maher. I absolutely loved, and he was making a broader commentary, I think just on like Americans or something anyway, but the quote was that everybody wants to be a rock star, but nobody wants to go and take the time to learn the chords.
Yeah.
And I think he was referencing like the video game, Rock Band or Guitar Hero and all these things where you had all these people that were essentially, and I never got into it because
air
I was
guitar.
trying to play real instruments, but you had all these people that were playing this rock band, which essentially was like hitting buttons and following patterns. I mean, it was the equivalent of like Simon Says, a game we played when we were in kindergarten, and everybody was thinking that they were rock stars, but they couldn't pick up a real instrument and play it to save their lives, right? So,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, everybody wants to be a rock star, but nobody wants to take the time to learn the
No,
chords. That's
you got
one
to
of my
put in your
favorites.
time, man. You got to put in the time, and that type of discipline. That's where if you don't right, if you don't learn that from when you're a wee little one, right, and you don't keep applying it, where are you going to be, right? And this is what I worry about. This is what I talk about with idiocracy, right? If you're always everything you ever want is by pushing the little button, you don't really have to think about nothing. You don't really have to invest. And where are you going to be, right, at the end of it all? And so anyway, this the idea of super intelligence, um, to me is about being able to augment in a useful fashion a mind that is already disciplined, right? Um, so yeah, I think we can get to a point where we can augment people's thinking and that kind of thing. Um, but that's probably the next level away that's truly out there. At least in my opinion, that's where I'm at right now. Now let's look at Wolverine and Deadpool. Remember Deadpool in his little hand?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, so the idea
they
is
were
that you can heal.
yeah, they were both in the same movie. They were together not that long ago.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. So you're like a super healer, right? So where does that go, right? In technology wise? Well, we do got things like genetic editing and CRISPR and all that other fun stuff. Nothing dynamic yet. I mean, uh, can we really interface with biology right now and enhance and the healing, the time to heal and that kind of thing? Not really, but can we do bioprinting, right? Can we
Hmm.
do cloning and advanced tissue regeneration in the lab? Yeah, we're getting close to that, right? So really, it's about what you talk about, right? What Wolverine is a little bit way out there. He's the Superman, the true Superman, from a point of view of being able to age, right? It's
Hmm.
to him it's the fountain of youth, right? Like if you have the ability to constantly heal, right? You're right at the cellular level, right? You're able to rebuild yourself. There's no deterioration. How long will you be able to live, right? I mean, they talk about you know the stories back in the Bible, right? People were 300, 600 years old. How do you achieve that, right? Um, how does you know a person aging over 100 years in this society today, in this civilization today, it's a it's something, right? It's it's rare. I would say it's very popular, right? It's most people are dying somewhere between. It depending on where you are. There's a lot of factors, but let's say you're in a relatively healthy environment. You pass away in your 80s to 100, right? Somewhere in that range, right? But if you're at a cellular level, being able to regenerate yourself at a higher degree, um, where does that stop, right? And I so there's lots of questions out there for what is aging, and can that be curtailed, and how is aging like healing, right?
Yeah, because
There's a
essentially
lot
that
of
is what happens over time,
yeah,
right? Deterioration, like you said. And if you look up this guy, Brian Johnson, who's sort of a tech entrepreneur, multi-millionaire, multi-billionaire, what have you, right? That's what he's doing right now. He's trying to find out, what it's going to take to stop his aging process. I saw him on an interview not that long ago where he says, he's however old he is, he's somewhere around 50, but he says biologically he's only like 30 or something, right? That was is just he's been doing this for a number of years, but I mean, in his case, he's downing like over 100 pills every day,
Yeah,
you know,
that's
and
not.
he's
Yeah, that's not doable, right, for the average person.
yeah. So I mean, it's I mean, he,
Yeah.
he wears a baseball cap that shoots red light into his scalp, um, collects his own stool samples, and sleeps with a tiny jetpack attached to his penis to monitor his nighttime erections.
Well, you got me there. Oh my
Back to
goodness.
superhero. This guy's
Superhero.
penis is a little superhero.
Oh my goodness. Okay. So what we've
We're in
got
the
here is
gutter
a
again.
jetpack. A jetpack mounted on something very sensitive, I guess. Eh? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. What happens if those little they fall out of calibration? They just pick you right up out of the bed or what? Okay. Anyway, that's
Johnson
yeah.
thinks of any act that accelerates aging, like eating a cookie or getting less than 8 hours of sleep, as an act of violence. He's a hate
Hmm.
for him to examine my lifestyle.
Yeah. You're killing yourself.
Nothing but violence on my
Yeah.
end.
Well, I mean, there's lots of people out there, and some people listen to me might want to kill me right now, but they're 80 years old and they chain smoke for most of their life, and it's like, how can they get away with it, right? How can you put your body through all that and still, reach? And yet, somebody who's, you know, exercising every day and eating right, and they flip over and die of a heart attack at 55, right? It doesn't make sense. So, yeah, we don't have all the answers right now, right? Um, that's very obvious. And modern medicine is not so modern. They got a lot to learn, right?
Well,
Um,
I don't know. They've been able to invent tiny penis jetpacks. So,
there.
I
You-
mean,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know where we go from there, but
I don't know what you're
uh,
gonna do with that. I mean, that's so many applications. Okay, so let's move on from that.
we've
uh,
gone from the brown note to
yeah.
tiny penis jetpacks. So,
Yeah, we're getting some very useful technology conversations going
yeah.
on here. Yeah. So how about the Flash? Could we actually? No, I have a real problem with the Flash, right?
All
Because
right. Let's
the
see.
Flash is breaking physics rules, right? It's
This
breaking
is true.
momentum
Yeah.
and acceleration, and it just doesn't work.
The
Okay.
multiverse.
Yeah, it's just. I'm sorry. The Flash is just a flash in the pan. It's so far out. It's not there, right? Like you're literally you turn your muscular and you turn yourself to mush. Going at that type of speed and stopping all of a sudden. It's just not something that like we're not built to handle that. Now, here's the other thing though. Um, we don't know and understand a lot about gravity, right? Yet, right? And if we can manipulate gravity, which is a fundamental force, we might be able to utilize that as a counter to inertia, things like that, right? Um, where does that get us? That gets us to a point where we can achieve what normally we can't. The forces, what normal forces would knock us out or kill us, we'd be able to go beyond those barriers, right? Um, that's what we're getting. So, to me, this is a field of study in physics. It's not really about the Flash, but
Yeah. I mean, it was
we
basically
got a lot to
like
learn yet.
if you look at the Flash, that was a very supernatural type thing, right? That he was able to harness. Um, I forget what it was called, but something like the Force or something that he was harnessing that was almost supernatural, right? That sort of gave him
Oh,
this
middle
ability.
chlorians, but they didn't say that back then.
Yeah.
Isn't that the Star Wars one?
But really, in terms of like enhanced speed, though, we're really going to be relying on whether it's exoskeletons or other technology that allows us to travel at high rates of speed, right? Electric vehicles that have instant propulsion, or, translate that into like, other flying vehicles and so on. I mean, I think that's really where, technology is going to take us as far as, achieving that enhanced speed, right?
Yeah.
But when you look at it, I mean, that's where a lot of these superheroes come from, where they don't have, like, some of them have like an innate, supernatural ability or whatever it is, right? Like heat vision, or, super scream, or whatever it is, right? But really it's like utilizing technology. So you have, like, we haven't talked about Batman yet, which is probably my favorite superhero, but he has no like innate superpower, right?
Yeah.
Um, he's just, a billionaire that lost his parents and decided to like fight, crime because of it, right? But because of his money, which I guess is similar to Tony Stark in a way, right? He was able to, have all these fantastical gadgets, and, the Batmobile, and in later days, the Bat helicopter, or the supersonic jet, or what have you, right? But he was, you know, really finding ways to augment himself with technology. So when you think about it, outside of the science fiction realm, that's kind of where we're going to see some of this go, right? Where we're starting to see all these various technologies. And we actually started this podcast there a year or so ago, and a lot of what we talked about was this convergence of technology, right? We
Yeah.
talked about emerging technologies because we wanted to talk about, well, what was happening, what was coming out. But what we started to realize is that a lot of these technologies are actually a convergence of multiple types of technologies into one sort of outcome, as it were, right? And that was, Batman, the Batcave with the supercomputer, and the super vehicles, and the utility belt, and he's certainly come a long way from the Kabam and Pow and whatever of the '60s Batman, right? But even back then, that was the basis, right? That he had sort
Yeah.
of these gadgets, as it were. And there's plenty available these days. If you want to go and like concoct yourself some sort of superhero persona and outfit and technology, and in some cases people are doing that. There's sort of people who are being vigilantes out there, right? And becoming like an everyday superhero. But I mean, for Batman, for me, it was always, I think that was kind of like the appeal, right? Like, he had all these
Every
cool
man.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah, like he wasn't anything special, but he was able to do really cool and interesting things utilizing, I guess, like technology, which is something that, we both have grown up with. And I've been fascinated with technology since I was a kid. So I think that was the reason I was very much drawn to like a superhero like Batman, right? Because it was
Versus
sort of, there was,
Superman,
yeah,
you have a Batman who's kind of the everyman, right?
yeah,
And it has all the machines and everything to augment what he can do. But essentially, he's a person, right? And then you got Superman over there, Mr. Layer Eyes, fly around, or laser eyes, or fly around in the air, and pick up the moon and whatever. Incredible strength, right? That's just unmatchable on that can never be, right? So people would gravitate toward what they're what they are comfortable with, what they feel that they could accomplish, right? Um,
yeah,
so
there's like a
yeah,
tangibility to it,
there's
right?
a tangibility.
You could see, yourself being able to accomplish that some sort of way. It wasn't this sort of fantastical leap, as it were, right?
Mhm.
But then again, I mean, that was sort of, there was sort of an attraction there, right? And then, but when you look at it, at the essence of this idea of like superheroes is really about, sort of a leap, as it were, right? That you could be something, you know, more fantastical than you are in your everyday life. In fact, you saw some of the superheroes had that double life, right? You had Clark
Yeah,
Kent that worked at the Daily Bugle. You had Peter Parker, right? Um, we had a lot of these superheroes had sort of their like secret identity, right? They could switch sort of back and forth between them,
right.
right? Which was kind of like another interesting dichotomy, that even though they were led these super lives, that they they really longed to be normal in a way. I think it was in the I don't know, second or third Superman movie where he just wanted to be normal, and he went he went to the what was it the Fortress of Solitude or something, and he figured out how to lose or get rid of his superpowers type thing, right? Because he
Yeah.
just wanted to go live a normal life with Lois Lane. So it was like as much as he had these amazing powers. He still just wanted to be a human like me and you. I mean, you can't really ask for much more than that, right? It's a
Well,
pretty big compliment.
that's the funny part about it, isn't it? All like no matter what, the grass is always greener, right? Can't be satisfied, you know.
Yeah.
It's good.
Well, what about yourself, Patrick? When you were a kid and starting to take in these superhero things, what was the superpower that you wanted? Like, what if someone said, like, what superpower do you want? What you can pick one. Which one would
Well,
you
I think
have
as a
had?
teenager, I'd say I want to be invisible as a teenager, but that's beside the point.
I'd
Okay.
say I was invisible as a teenager, but that's a
That's
whole
right.
different story.
You'll have to get into that sometime. Um, yeah, so yeah, who do I want to be? I don't know.
Well, what power, right? What would be your go if someone said you could have any superpower? What would that have been, or what would it be now?
Well, now I would my superpower I'd love to have is the ability to heal.
Ah,
But there's a counter to that, and they always talk about it, right? Somebody who can heal always gets taken advantage of, you know.
ah.
So, but yeah, there's that. Um, as
Well,
for incredible strength or something like, oh, sure, it's fun. Sure, yeah, let's do that.
well, I would say probably one of the most popular ones, or the one for me always was that if I could fly. So if I was given, that if I was posed that question around, if you could have any superpower, what would it be? And I would say the like power of flight. Like I remember even having dreams as a kid where I was flying, over the land, up in the sky. I don't know what I was doing, but this idea that you could fly, I think if it has been one of the most like the idea that you could fly is, I think, probably the most popular in the sense of not only is there's so much possibility there, but if you look at, a lot of the superheroes have some sort of form of being able to fly, right? Whether that's sort of some innate ability like Superman, um, or whether it's like through a suit like Iron Man, right? It's this sort of ability to fly that's quite amazing. In fact, we were trying to look at some like old superhero shows, and we were talking about planning this episode. And what was the one superhero that could fly, but he had to have the aerosol cans? That was that was my I think it was my secret identity. Well, his superpower was kind of buoyancy, right?
Buoyancy.
Like
Oh,
he was
okay. You're
he was
buoyant.
able to he was
Oh,
able to float. He was just not able.
I'm buoyant.
Uh,
Okay. Yeah. Now that's just one of those hard to define superpowers.
yeah, he can jump high and he could do amazing flips. And in the second season, he gains the ability to move through the air without the use of aerosol cans. So I guess he started out. That was just sort of his like training wheels, right?
So he
He start,
he basically learned how to flutter his fingers or something like that.
so that's that's probably the least popular or least requested superpower is buoyancy.
Buoyant. I like to be buoyant. I guess if in the middle of the ocean, yeah, yeah, that works. Yeah, you know, your ship is sunk. You're trying to stay above the water. Yeah, that works.
I mean, come on, not everybody can be the Hulk or Spider Man or what have you, right?
No, no. And in the end, it makes you wonder what's going to happen when we think about how we're going to evolve over time, right? What is, I mean, you have to believe a bit in evolution, the evolutionary model, and some sort of, uh, we'll call it intelligent mutation, right? What can happen, right, in the future? I don't know. Are we going to grow gills? Yeah, there's some TV shows in the past from that where you're able to basically just like Aquaman, right? You grow gills and go down into the great abyss of the ocean.
So we started out with all these fantastical superpowers, and now we've brought it all the way down to gills.
Breathing underwater. Yeah.
Well, anything's possible, really, right? Well, what's probable?
Yeah, what's probable?
Well, I think when it comes down to it, Patrick, like you're already halfway there to becoming a superhero, right?
How do you figure?
Already have like the super hair, right? The super curly hair. So the next step is just being able to fly, right? You said, believe it or not, you'll be walking on air.
Absolutely.
You never thought you could feel so free. On a wing and a prayer, man.
Sky so blue like a canvas torn, feet off the ground where dreams are born. Eyes wide open, can't believe it's real. Flying high with a heart to steal. I'm walking on air, can't believe it's true. Freedom's a wave and I'm riding it through. On a wing and a prayer to the great unknown. Superhero in the sky all alone. Star games twisting, shadows at night. Surfboard of justice I take to flight. Feelings tremble when I hit the sea. Never thought I'd live this crazy dream. I'm walking on air, can't believe it's true. Freedom's a wave and I'm riding it through. On a wing and a prayer to the great unknown. Superhero in the sky all alone. Spy games twisting, shadows at night. Surfboard of justice I take to flight. Feelings tremble when I hit the sea. Never thought I'd live this crazy dream. I'm walking on air, can't believe it's true. Freedom's a wave and I'm riding it through. On a wing and a prayer to the great unknown. Superhero in the sky all alone. Wind in my hair, the oceans roar. Secrets unravel on every shore. Chasing the sun where the truth may hide. Surfboard slicing through the tide. I'm walking on air, can't believe it's true. Freedom's a wave and I'm riding it through. On a wing and a prayer to the great unknown. Superhero in the sky all alone.
Thank you for listening to the Probability Podcast. Please join us next time for more musings from the generator and the discriminator.